If you like using weapons in Warframe, then let me tell you, 2025 is gonna be the year for you. So, in today's video, I'm gonna give you the very best weapon platform Warframes to use right now. We're gonna go over how they work, what makes them so good, and of course, I also got some example builds prepared for you. As always, big shoutouts to all our generous channel members. Follow me on Twitch, link in the description, streams probably starting in early February. And with all that being said, let's jump right into it. Now, when we're talking about the best gun runners in Warframe, then the first frame on today's list is also the latest frame that was released. Of course, I'm talking about Site-09. Site-09 might not have the very best or highest buffs for guns in the entire game, but his entire toolkit is focused around staying alive and dishing out tons of damage, so let's quickly jump into it to give you an overview of why he's such a good option if you like to point and shoot. Well, first of all, his first ability makes enemies not only visible through walls, but also it gives you a literal wall hack, so you can also shoot them through walls, through obstacles, makes it all very easy. Now, to be fair, outside of Disruption, this whole shooting through walls thing is not really all that necessary most of the time, but it's also not the only thing that this skill does. It also gives you a damage bonus too when you hit the enemy's weak points, which will also be marked through this ability. However, this is not yet it. Site-09's second ability is, in my personal opinion, one of the very best skills for guns in the entire game, because what it does is, you can drop for you or your allies a pack of elemental ammo that will not infuse that element onto your weapon, but it will create a second damage instance of said element whenever you shoot your weapon. Or in other words, to make it more simple, it's kind of like a Toxic Lash equivalent, just that it's not only for Toxin, but for pretty much any element in the entire game. Combine that elemental bonus damage with the additional bonus damage that you get from the highlighted weak spots with your first ability, and your weapons are gonna deal quite the numbers. One thing we should also not forget would be his passive, giving you a great crit chance bonus on top of everything that we've just mentioned, and I think you can see why Site-09 is a very good weapons platform. But, of course, for a good gun runner, damage output is not the only thing. We also, of course, need to talk about survivability, and Site-09, let me tell you, does have quite some of it with his third skill called Evade. Evade is very easy to describe. You become invisible, and whenever you headshot kill an enemy, this invisibility duration will be prolonged, so you can keep it up constantly. Shouldn't be all too difficult given the fact that Site-09 already has a very weak spot focused playstyle, so it perfectly fits in, giving you a nice equilibrium of survivability on the one hand and damage output through your gun buffing on the other. Now, to be fair, his fourth ability is an Exalted Sniper Rifle, which is definitely a strong weapon. I've talked about it in more detail in my dedicated Site-09 build guide, but this skill is kind of optional. If you want to use it, then you're definitely more than welcome to. It's totally viable. But if you wanted to use another weapon on him, then his fourth is the skill that you don't need and that you would replace with something else from the helmet. For example, Rhino's Roar if you want to deal more damage, a grouping ability, energized munitions, or whatever tickles your fancy. One thing to note here though, Site-09, although he gives buffs to all weapons in the game, when you use a sniper rifle on him, then his second ability will be much stronger than it is on all other types of weapons. Oh yeah, and just by the way, if you could maybe drop a little like for the video, that would be super amazing because it helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. Alright, up next I have to, yet again, talk about one of the Warframes that I basically speak about in every second video, I kind of feel like. I already have 2 build guides about him on this channel, and in each and every one of them I keep on saying, well, this is the definite build guide, and yet here we sit. And again, we're talking about Harrow, because with the Warframe 99 update, he became even stronger one more time. Now, at this point of the game, I think it should go without say that Harrow is one of the, maybe even, depending on the weapon, the best weapon buffer in the entirety of Warframe, so I don't want to take all too much time explaining every single detail about his skills. It's pretty darn simple if we're being honest. His first skill gives you shield, so it makes him great for shield gating. His second skill gives you heal and, more importantly, fire rate for your weapon. Number 3 gives you all the energy in the world, so you're never gonna have to struggle about this. And his bread and butter, of course, number 4, giving you the crazy red crits by providing up to plus 200% flat crit crit chance on headshot. Just to make that clear, flat crit chance means no matter what the weapon's base crit chance is, there's no multiplication going on, so even if it is 0%, your gun is gonna have 200% crit chance at least. Now, so far so good, this makes Hero very strong, but with Warframe 1999 and the introduction of Side 09 about whom we just spoke, we got kind of a new meta for gun running Warframes, and that is Side 09's invisibility skill Evade, because that just so happens to be his helmet ability. So in other words, you can now make every single Warframe, if you desire that, into a constantly invisible stealth menace. Why am I saying that right here? Because we also got a new arcane called Arcane Crepuscular, which gives you a flat plus 3x crit damage multiplier whenever you are invisible. So in other words, we can take the invisibility from Side 09, put it onto Hero, ideally in his first skill slot I would say, and that then enables Hero, the previously not, now became invisible frame, to use Arcane Crepuscular to get more crit damage. Meaning not only do we have a crazy crit chance Warframe right here, but we now get completely unkillable through the invisibility and get rewarded for that by having the additional crit damage from Arcane Crepuscular. This right here would be the example build that I'm running in the background, and even though Hero doesn't really need the invisibility to stay alive, just having that in the first place to amplify your crit potential even further turns him into probably overall the second best gunrunner in the game right now. Number 3 on today's list is one of the quote-unquote perfect Warframes, of which we don't have all too many in the game, but I think we can all agree Gauss should not miss on this list. Now, to be fair, all in all, Gauss's gun buffing potential isn't all that amazing as compared to the likes of, let's say, Hero or Side 09. Yes, he can increase your weapon's damage with his augment for Thermal Sunder, giving you the ability to infuse both heat and cold onto your weapon. If you use it twice, by the way, heat and cold, that will then combine into a blast infusion, which, depending on the weapon, can be very strong. But the main reason why you would play Gauss is first and foremost that he is a lot of fun to play and that he provides sort of indirect weapon buffing tools. Here's what I mean. His first ability gives you a whole lot of movement speed, and while a lot of players really like playing around with this, I kind of think it depends on the tile set, especially in the more narrow, older levels. It gets a bit claustrophobic and you get stuck in the scenery quite a bit, so I don't end up using his first all too much. But with his kinetic armor, which can make you absolutely 100% invincible 2/3 of the time, and all the other stuff like, for example, the boost of reload speed and fire rate, playing Gauss with your favorite weapon, for example his signature the Exceltra, which turns the whole level upside down, is just so much fun. In addition, with his skill Thermal Sunder, you can inflict heat as well as cold onto the enemy, meaning either you can use it as an AoE armor strip, heat strips away at least 50% of the enemy armor, or you could also go for the cold version of it, which is not only very great from a defensive standpoint, because frozen enemies can't attack you, but through the cold status effects, enemies also become more susceptible to your critical damage. So that is definitely also something to consider, making Gauss probably the overall weakest frame on today's list in terms of how much weapon buffing he can provide, but definitely still someone to try out just because his kit is so synergistic, so much fun to play, and Gauss just feels right. If you've ever played him, you know what I mean, right? Gauss simply feels right. Okay. Up next, we need to talk about a frame that I haven't talked about yet on this channel, at least not in a dedicated video, but after testing for this video here, I will definitely make a guide on her very soon. You might want to leave a sub to the channel if you don't want to miss it day one, but the frame that I'm talking about here would be Mirage. Now, Mirage is a relatively versatile frame, not necessarily limited to just being a weapons platform, but you can certainly play her as one and she dishes out numbers. Whew! If you have some sort of fetish for big large integers, then you gotta put a ring on that chick now. Here's what I mean. Mirage has access to the skill Eclipse, which is an ability that can either give you up to 90% damage reduction, making you very tanky, or on the other hand, it can give you a massive damage buff, which is not base damage as many people believe, but it is a completely unique separate damage multiplier, which is multiplicative to all the other damage that you mod onto your weapon. This whole thing has a base of 200%, which is already ludicrous, but it scales with ability strength, meaning that you can easily get it to over 700% extra damage multiplier. That is true, but that is not even where it ends, because her first ability creates mirror images of herself around her, which can shoot in sync with you. So it's not only you who shoots with plus 700% damage at the enemy, but the gal pals by your side do so too. Now, to be fair here, by default the damage output of your mirror images is quite a bit lower than your own one, but this also scales with ability strength, and there is even an augment that further amplifies the mirror images damage, which I would very much recommend using, so that you end up kind of dealing the same damage with them as you do personally. So yeah, long story short, imagine you have somebody who deals 7 times the damage, all while at the same time doubling or sometimes tripling even that output through the mirror images, and that, ladies and gentle frames, would be Mirage for you. Now, to be fair, all this power, until now, was kept in check by the fact that she was kind of a glass cannon. She can't tank damage unless you use Eclipse in the defensive version, which then diminishes your weapon damage bonus. But also here, with the introduction of Side 09, as you see in the background, we can also now make Mirage invisible, which solves all her survivability issues and, just like with Harrow, gives her access to Arcane Crepuscular in addition to all the damage bonuses that she already gets. This right here would be an example build. Take it with a grain of salt. I just quickly slapped it together for this video. I am going to take a deeper look into her in my upcoming dedicated Mirage guide, but I think it is good enough to show you which ridiculous performance you can expect from this lady. Okay, up next we have, I think, the definite #1 when it comes to weapon platforms in Warframe, and that is, I think to nobody's surprise, of course, Saren. Saren, bro, I don't even know where I should start, because when was she ever not broken? It is crazy, the amount of numbers that you can deal with her. It's beyond good and evil. It is in the stratosphere of Mars, so let's talk about it. First of all, Saren is most known for her skill Toxic Lash, which, just like Side 09's Elemental Ammunition, creates a second damage instance for every hit that you deal, this second instance dealing pure toxin damage based on how much damage your weapon deals. This is already a very strong damage buff, and it also has some funky interactions with some other skills, but I don't want to get too much into that right here. However, this is only where it starts. Next, her first ability creates spores on enemies that can spread within the room and constantly applies corrosive status effects to the affected enemies. Give Saren 1 or 2 green Archon shards, and this, in the blink of an eye, will completely armor strip all the enemies around you, which for you means more damage output to them, but it also comes with an augment, which infuses corrosive damage onto your weapon, scaling with ability strength, meaning you deal even bigger numbers. And as if armor reduction plus 2 weapon damage buffing skills are not good enough yet, we have her fourth ability, which applies AoE Viral to all the enemies around you. To be fair here, the Viral is only 1 stack and not 10, so you don't get the plus 325% damage, but still, 1 Viral effect means double damage to enemy health, so you don't only have the armor reduction to weaken the enemies, but you can also apply Viral to double that damage even further. As you see, and can also witness in the background, Saren is absolutely bonkers when it comes to damage output. Just like with Mirage, her kind of flaw has always been that she is a bit squishy, right? She can't tank all that much damage, and just like Mirage, she's also not specifically made for shield gating. That was kind of the factor that always kept her in check, but I think you already guessed it. Just like with Mirage, we can also here go and use Side 09's invisibility skill, et voila, survivability issues are being fixed. This right here is the Saren build that I'm running in the background, and if you like gun running in Warframe, then I think Saren should be your #1 priority if you don't have her already. Alright, the last gun runner on today's list before we go into some honorable mentions would be Vault. Vault, similar to Gauss, is not really known for giving you a ton of damage through ability buffs, but the reason why you would probably like him as a weapon platform is mainly the entirety of his kit just providing all that fun and convenience when using weapons in his hands. Here's what I mean. First of all, you can infuse your weapons with electricity damage by using his first ability with the Augment Shock Trooper. This works just like most other elemental infusion abilities in the game. Simply put the augment on, hold the ability button, and then depending on your ability strength, your weapon gets that bonus. But that is not the only damage bonus that he can provide. Also, when using his primarily defensive third ability, you can create electric shields that you can also pick up and carry around with you. And when you shoot through those shields, then the ammunition that passes through the shields gets further buffed by plus 50% electricity damage bonus, and it also receives a crit damage multiplier on top of that. In addition to that, his second ability, Speed, is probably one of the most popular ones for speedrunning missions because it massively increases your movement speed. If you want to use him with a melee weapon, it also increases your melee attack speed by a ton. And his fourth ability is kind of a bit power crept over the years. Originally, it was kind of intended as an AoE nuke, but now you could either go and replace it with something better from the helmet, or you could also use the augment for it, which then gives you great defensive utility by refilling your shields depending on how much damage you deal with it. Choice here is really yours. I would probably personally recommend replacing it with maybe Mirage's Eclipse to use it defensively, but of course, you do you. This right here would be an example build for Volt. Also here, take it with a grain of salt because of how incredibly versatile Volt is. You can't really build him in the quote-unquote right way. Depending on how you use it, the build of course varies. But just in case you haven't tried Volt yet, then he is also definitely one possible weapons platform to look out for in 2025. Alright, so I personally think the ones that I mentioned so far are currently the best gunrunners in the game, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other frames who work very well as weapon platforms. So before we wrap it up for today, let's also quickly go about some honorable mentions, which I haven't featured on today's list, but also deliver very nice performance. First things first, one thing to mention here would be all types of Warframes who have some sort of elemental damage infusion for your weapons. You know, we had Volt with his Shock Trooper, we had Gauss with the Thermal Sunder Augment and all that stuff, but of course we also have other frames who can do the same thing, like for example Amber with heat damage, even Oberon, who's kinda shunned as being one of the worst Warframes in the game right now, even he has a radiation damage infusion augment, and there is definitely much more out there in that sense. Another frame that I should definitely mention here would be Yareli, who started as probably the worst Warframe who was ever introduced regarding her state at launch, but has received buff over buff over buff over the last couple of years, and now is in a very healthy position. She provides great crit buffs, increases enemy damage vulnerability, and at the same time is very tanky. However, it should be noted that in her case, all the weapon buffs are limited to secondary weapons only, but if that's what you're looking into, then Yareli should totally be on your list. As should be Zephyr, who can also increase your damage output, but the main thing about her is not so much the weapon buffing per se, but what you can do with the enemies in her tornadoes, because whatever you suck into there, if you shoot in the tornado, you're gonna have an absolute firework of damage and status effects. Pretty much nothing in the game even stands the slightest chance of surviving this level of carnage. I said it many times before, and I'm gonna say it again, Zephyr is definitely a very, very underrated frame. But which Warframe is your favorite weapon platform? Let us know in the comments down below. And just in case you recently returned to Warframe after a longer hiatus, then definitely also check out my returning player's guide right here. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nost Linux Gaming, Turtlepeer, Lycon Shepherd, Ondakanio2, Pepperwolf, Mihawky, Yagis, Hoke Hunter, Noob Phoenix, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot.